They say that the sharpest blade is not the one that is brandished and swung, but the one that rests quietly in its sheath, unseen and underestimated until the moment it is needed most. For 30 years, I was the sheath. I was the comfortable, worn leather case that held my family together, protecting them, buffering them from the world, and keeping the sharp edges of life from cutting them too deeply. My children, my beautiful, polished children, never once thought to look inside. They saw the soft exterior, the gentle stitching, and assumed that was all there was. They mistook the sheath for the sword. A foolish, fatal mistake. A mistake that will cost them everything they thought they were entitled to. This is the story of how my daughter planned her dream wedding, the one she told me I wasn't welcome to attend in person, and how I, in turn, planned my dream life, the one I'd be funding with the very money she thought was hers to command. It's a lesson in family, finance, and the quiet, unyielding power of a mother who has finally had enough. If you've ever felt taken for granted, overlooked, or pushed aside by the very people you gave everything to, then subscribe to my channel, because you're going to want to see how this ends. I learned that silence isn't weakness, it's the sound of a strategy forming. It's the calm before you reclaim your world, piece by painful, satisfying piece. I became the sword, and the first thing I cut were the strings they thought they had attached to me. My liberation began with a single text message, a casual, digital execution of a mother's worth, and it will end with me, free, watching the sun rise over an ocean they will never be able to afford again. And the beautiful, terrible irony. They paid for my ticket. They just don't know it yet. I will recount every step, every decision, and every glorious moment of clarity that brought me here. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning. I remember the light was streaming through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, the same way it had every morning for the 35 years I'd lived in that house. I was wiping down the counters, the familiar scent of lemon cleaner in the air, a scent my husband, Robert, had always said smelled like home. The phone buzzed on the granite, a jarring, modern sound in the quiet rhythm of my day. It was from my daughter, Chloe. My heart did a familiar little leap of pleasure, the one it always does when one of my children reaches out. I dried my hands on my apron, the one she'd given me for Christmas 3 years ago, a gag gift, she'd called it, with the words domestic goddess printed in glittery letters. I never thought it was a gag. I wore it with a quiet pride she would never understand. I picked up the phone, my reading glasses perched on my nose, and read the words that would detonate the foundation of my world. It wasn't a long message. Chloe was never one for lengthy prose unless it was an Instagram caption. It was brutally efficient. It read, "Hey Mom. So excited for the big day. Marcus and I were just finalizing the seating plan, and it's a logistical nightmare, lol. The venue is super strict on capacity. To make it easier on everyone, we are going to set up a premium live stream, so you can watch from home. That way you won't have to worry about the travel or getting tired. We'll feel you there with us. Love you." Followed by a string of heart and bride emojis. I read it once. Then twice. Then a third time, the words blurring as my vision tunneled. Watch from home, easier on everyone, won't have to worry about getting tired. Each phrase was a carefully wrapped insult, disguised as concern. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive cruelty. The mother of the bride, relegated to a spectator behind a screen. An inconvenience. A problem to be managed. Not a participant, not an honored guest, but a line item they had decided to cut. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the wooden seat cold against my legs. The phone felt heavy in my hand, like a stone. I could feel the blood draining from my face. This wasn't just about a wedding invitation. This was the culmination of 1,000 tiny cuts, a decade of being slowly, methodically phased out of my own children's lives, except when my checkbook was required. They saw me as a utility, a function. The bank of Mom. The free babysitter. The emergency contact. But not a person. Not Eleanor. Not their mother. I thought of the wedding binder. The thick, white, 3-ring binder that sat on the corner of my desk. For the past 6 months, it had been my constant companion. I had sourced florists, tasted cakes, interviewed photographers, and negotiated with caterers. I had spent hours on the phone with Chloe, listening to her fret over shades of ivory and the exact font for the invitations. I had placated her when she cried over a bridesmaid's dress being the wrong tone of blush, and celebrated with her when she found the perfect, ridiculously expensive shoes. I had already paid the deposits. Tens of thousands of dollars of deposits. From the account Robert and I had built, the one earmarked for our children's futures. And now, I was being told to watch the event I had orchestrated and funded on a laptop in my quiet, empty house. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. The casual cruelty of it was what truly twisted the knife. The pretense of caring for my well-being, suggesting I might get tired. I was 62 years old, not 102. I walked 5 miles every morning. I managed the entire estate Robert had left me, an intricate portfolio of properties and investments that my children knew absolutely nothing about. They thought my money came from a simple widow's pension and the sale of some vague stocks their father had owned. They saw the 10-year-old car I drove, the simple clothes I wore, the modest way I lived, and they built a narrative around it. The narrative of poor, simple mom. A woman who didn't understand their sophisticated world. A woman who needed to be managed, handled, and, when necessary, excluded for her own good. The emojis at the end of the text felt like tiny, smiling daggers. Love you. The lie was so stark, so blatant, it was almost impressive. Love is not a transaction. It is not something you perform in exchange for funding your lifestyle. I looked around my kitchen, at the photos on the refrigerator. Chloe as a little girl with a gap-toothed grin. My son, Julian, on his first day of school. Us, as a family, on a vacation Robert had insisted we take, even though we couldn't really afford it at the time. He had said, memories are the only investment that always pays dividends. How right he was. And how bankrupt my children had become. They had traded all those dividends for designer bags and luxury cars. A coldness started to spread through my chest, extinguishing the initial fire of pain. It was a chilling, clarifying cold. The kind that freezes water into a solid, unbreakable sheet of ice. I did not cry. I did not scream. I placed the phone face down on the counter. The vibration of an incoming call a few minutes later, Chloe, no doubt, wanting to confirm I'd received my walking papers, went unanswered. I stood up, walked into my husband's study, and closed the door. The real planning was about to begin. My late husband, Robert, was a quiet man, but he was not a simple one. To the outside world, and even to our children in their later years, he was just Dad. A kind, slightly old-fashioned man, who ran a moderately successful construction supply company. He wore practical shoes, drove a domestic truck, and believed a firm handshake was better than any contract. My children loved him, of course, but in that casually dismissive way that the young have for the old. They saw his frugality as a charming quirk, not a core philosophy. They didn't understand the steel in his spine, or the razor-sharp mind behind his gentle eyes. I did. I had met him when I was 19, working as a bookkeeper for a small firm. He was a client. He'd come in with a showbox full of receipts and a dream of building something that would last. I was the one who saw the pattern in the chaos, who organized the slips of paper into a coherent business plan. He built things with his hands. I built the structures that allowed him to do it. We were a team, a silent partnership that powered our entire world. For 40 years, we built. We bought the first small plot of land when Chloe was just a baby. Robert cleared it himself on weekends. We lived in a tiny trailer on the property while he built our house, the very house I was sitting in now. He'd let me design the kitchen first, saying it was the heart of the home, and the heart should be strong. While he was building the company, I was raising our children and managing our investments. I had a knack for it. I'd read financial papers while the kids were napping, making small, smart plays in the market with the little extra we had. Robert trusted me completely. "You see the long game, Eleanor," he'd say. "I just see the next wall to build. Our children, Chloe and Julian, grew up in this world of quiet industry. We gave them everything they needed, but not always everything they wanted. We taught them the value of work. Chloe's first job was filing invoices at the company office for $5 an hour. Julian's was sweeping sawdust in the lumber yard. They hated it. They saw their friends getting lavish allowances, going on exotic spring breaks. They started to see our life not as one of prudent, deliberate construction, but as one of lack. Their resentment was a quiet, creeping vine that I chose to ignore for too long. They didn't see the sacrifices. They didn't see the second mortgage we took out to expand the business, the sleepless nights I spent juggling payroll, the vacations we postponed year after year. They only saw that their friend Jennifer was driving a new BMW for her 16th birthday, while Chloe got our old, reliable sedan. The complaints started subtly. "Mom, all my friends have a house at the lake. Dad, why can't we fly first class just once?" Robert would just smile his quiet smile. Because Coach gets you there at the same time, he thought he was teaching them resilience. What we were actually teaching them was how to want. After Robert passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, the children's sense of entitlement blossomed into full-blown avarice. They descended upon the house with a cloying, false sympathy that barely masked their glittering eyes, hungry for the inheritance they assumed was coming. They were shocked when the lawyer, our old friend Mr. Harrison, explained the will. Robert, in his infinite, quiet wisdom, had foreseen this. He had seen the people our children were becoming. Everything, the business, the properties we'd acquired over the years, the extensive stock portfolio I had nurtured from a tiny seed, was placed into an ironclad discretionary trust. The sole trustee, with absolute and total power to manage and distribute the funds. Me? Eleanor Grace Abernathy. My children were listed only as beneficiaries, meaning they were entitled to receive funds only at my discretion. At the reading, Chloe had actually scoffed. "A trust? That's so complicated. Why not just split everything?" Julian, ever the pragmatist, had tried to be smoother. "Mom, we can help you with this. These financial matters can be overwhelming." They saw my grief and mistook it for incompetence. They saw my simple lifestyle and mistook it for poverty. I let them. It was easier, I thought, to let them believe I was just a simple widow, living off the interest. I didn't tell them the construction supply company had been sold 2 years prior for a sum that would have made their heads spin. I didn't tell them I had reinvested that money into a diverse portfolio that included commercial real estate and tech startups. I didn't tell them that the charming little vineyard Chloe had set her heart on for her wedding venue was not owned by some trendy hospitality group, but by the Abernathy Family Trust. By me. I let them treat me like a relic. I paid for Chloe's master's degree. I gave Julian the down payment for his sprawling suburban house. I funded their startup businesses that never seemed to quite start up. I paid for their vacations, their cars, their designer clothes. Every time, it came with a little lecture about how they were worried about my finances. "Mom, are you sure you can afford this?" Chloe would ask, even as her hand was out. It was a performance, a way for them to assuage their guilt. As long as they were concerned, they weren't greedy. They were just loving children looking out for their dotty old mother. I played my part. I'd sigh and say, "Your father wanted you to be happy," and so, the pattern was set. I was the silent bank, the ever-open vault. And in return, I was granted occasional audiences with my own children, where they would regale me with tales of a life I was funding but was never truly a part of. The wedding was to be the pinnacle of this arrangement. A $250,000 spectacle, from the couture gown to the celebrity florist. And I, the financier, the architect of their father's legacy, was to watch it on a screen, like a stranger. The text message wasn't just an insult, it was a miscalculation of catastrophic proportions. They had finally pushed the quiet, accommodating sheath aside, and they were about to find out what the sword felt like. For a full hour after reading the text, I sat in Robert's study, the door closed, surrounded by the scent of old books and his faint, lingering aroma of pipe tobacco and cedar. The room had always been my sanctuary, the command center of our quiet empire. On the walls were not family photos, but framed maps of the county, architectural blueprints, and the original charter for our first company. This was the room where the work was done. My grief for Robert was a constant, steady ache, but in that moment, it sharpened into a tool. What would he have done? He wouldn't have yelled. He wasn't a man for grand confrontation. He was a man of action, of quiet, decisive moves that realigned the world to his will. He would have seen the situation for what it was, a structure with a faulty foundation. And he would have demolished it and started again. My own tears had dried before they had a chance to fall. The initial shock had receded, replaced by a profound and glacial calm. The decision wasn't a tempestuous one. It didn't arrive in a crash of anger and sorrow. It settled over me, as soft and silent as a snowfall, but with the weight of an avalanche behind it. I was done. Done being the ghost at their feast. Done being the footnote in my own family's story. Done funding a life from which I was actively excluded. The turning point was not a scream, but a whisper. It was the quiet click of a lock turning in my own mind. I picked up the heavy, old-fashioned telephone on Robert's desk, the one with the rotary dial he'd refused to replace. I didn't need to look up the number. I dialed Mr. Harrison, our lawyer and a man who had known me since I was that 19-year-old girl with a showbox of receipts. His secretary put me through immediately. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm but professional. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "George," I said, my own voice steady, devoid of the tremor I had expected. "I need to make some changes to the trust's distribution protocol." There was a slight pause on the other end. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Everything," I said, and the word felt truer than it had in years, "is about to be. I need to schedule a meeting. I want to freeze all current discretionary outflows to the beneficiaries, effective immediately." I could almost hear the shift in his posture through the phone line. The friendly lawyer was gone, replaced by the sharp legal mind Robert had trusted for 40 years. "All of them?" he asked, his tone now crisp. "Are we talking about the monthly stipends? The credit cards?" "Everything," I repeated. "The stipends. The credit lines. The automatic bill payments for their mortgages and car loans. I want it all shut down. And George, I also need you to pull the file on the North Ridge Vineyard property." Another pause, this one longer. I knew what he was thinking. The vineyard. Chloe's wedding venue. "Eleanor. Chloe's wedding is in 3 weeks." "I'm aware of the date," I said, my voice as cool and smooth as the polished mahogany of the desk. "Please have the paperwork ready. I'll be in your office at 9 a.m. tomorrow." I hung up the phone before he could ask any more questions. Then, I stood up and walked over to the large oak filing cabinet in the corner of the room. I opened the drawer marked Trust. Inside were meticulously organized files, one for each property, each investment, each beneficiary. I pulled out Chloe's file and Julian's file. 4 years, I had added to them. Every receipt for tuition, every wire transfer for a down payment, every credit card statement filled with lavish dinners and designer purchases that I had quietly paid. It was a paper trail of their entitlement, a ledger of my own enabling. I took the files to my desk and began to draft a letter. It wasn't an angry letter. It wasn't emotional. It was a simple, factual statement of account. A severance package, of sorts. I listed the date and the amount of every major disbursement I had made to them since their father's death. The grand total was staggering, even to me. It ran into the millions. This was the life they had taken for granted. This was the wellspring they thought would never run dry. My final act for the evening was small, but deeply symbolic. I went back to the kitchen and picked up my phone. I saw a dozen missed calls from Chloe and a string of increasingly frantic texts. "Mom, call me. Is everything okay? Seriously, are you mad about the live stream thing?" It wasn't a big deal. I opened our message thread. I scrolled up, past the emojis and the casual cruelty, past the years of one-sided conversations. I looked at her contact photo, a picture of her and Marcus, beaming on a yacht in the Caribbean, a vacation I had paid for. I held my finger down on the screen, and without a moment's hesitation, I pressed block. Then I did the same for Julian. A profound sense of peace washed over me. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. I was no longer the sheath. I was the sword, and I had just been drawn. The world was about to see my edge. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. There was no dread, no anxiety. Just a clean, clear sense of purpose. I dressed not in my usual comfortable slacks and sweater, but in a charcoal grey suit I hadn't worn in years. It was the suit I had worn to the final meeting when we sold Robert's company. A power suit. It felt like armor. I made my coffee, drank it black while standing at the kitchen window, and watched the dawn break over the trees Robert had planted. I felt his presence, not as a weight of grief, but as a silent, approving nod. I was doing what he would have done. I was protecting his legacy from the very people he had hoped to build it for. At precisely 9 a.m., I walked into the hushed, wood-paneled offices of Harrison, Creed and Associates. Mr. Harrison was waiting for me in his corner office, the one with the view of the entire city. The files I had requested were laid out neatly on his large conference table. He looked at me over the top of his glasses, his expression unreadable. "Eleanor," he said, gesturing to a chair. "You look formidable." "I feel formidable, George," I replied, taking a seat. "Let's begin." He walked me through the process with clinical precision. Freezing the assets was simple. A few phone calls to the financial institutions, a few signatures on official directives. As trustee, my authority was absolute. The monthly stipends that appeared in Chloe's and Julian's bank accounts like clockwork would cease. The platinum credit cards they used so carelessly would be declined. The automatic payments for their mortgages, their car leases, their country club memberships, all would be halted. I signed each document with a steady hand. The pen felt powerful, a scepter of my newfound sovereignty. "They will, of course, be notified by the banks," Mr. Harrison noted. "The first declined transaction will likely be the first they hear of it." "I'm counting on it," I said. Then we moved on to the main event. The North Ridge Vineyard. Mr. Harrison slid a thick portfolio across the table. "As you know, Eleanor, the trust is the sole proprietor of the LLC that owns North Ridge. It's one of the most profitable assets in the portfolio." I knew. I had overseen the renovation of the tasting room and the hiring of the new vineyard manager myself. It was a beautiful place, a jewel. A place my daughter felt so entitled to that she hadn't even bothered to ask to use it, merely informed me of the date she required it. "Chloe's wedding planner has been in contact with the venue manager," Mr. Harrison continued, consulting his notes. "She has a booking for the 21st. They seem to be under the impression that the venue fee is being waived." I gave a small, humorless smile. "An impression I need you to correct. What are your instructions, Eleanor?" I want you to call the wedding planner today. Inform her that there has been a change in management, and that the venue is no longer available on that date due to an unforeseen private event. A private event? Yes, I said. Mine. I'm thinking of hosting a small gathering for some old friends. People I haven't seen in years. People who might appreciate the view without feeling the need to post it on social media. Mr. Harrison allowed himself a small, wry smile. And what about the deposits she has paid to outside vendors? The caterer, the florist, the photographer. That, I said, leaning back in my chair, is the core of the issue. Chloe has entered into contracts for services totaling, by my estimate, close to $100,000, all with the assumption that the trust would pay the final balance. The deposits, which are paid, are likely non-refundable. He nodded slowly, seeing the elegant, brutal architecture of my plan. So when the venue is cancelled, she will still be on the hook for those vendors. But the accounts she uses to pay for them will be empty. Precisely, I said. Her choices will be to either cancel those contracts and forfeit the deposits, or to find another way to pay the full balance for a wedding that no longer has a location. A wedding she so graciously offered to let me watch from my phone. I revealed the full truth to him then. The text message. The casual, cruel dismissal. I saw a flash of anger in his eyes, the righteous indignation of a man who had revered my husband and respected me for decades. He looked at me, his old friend, this quiet woman who had managed a multimillion-dollar estate from her kitchen table, who had raised 2 children, who now saw her as nothing more than a nuisance with a bank account. He was my first ally, the first person to validate the cold fury that had been building inside me. They mistook your grace for weakness, Eleanor, he said softly. It's a common mistake. An expensive one. This was the great reveal, not to my children yet, but to myself and to the world through my lawyer. My strength wasn't just a hidden pot of gold. It was structural. It was the very foundation they stood on, a foundation I had just decided to liquefy. They thought they were living in a house they owned. They were about to discover they were tenants in a house I controlled, and their lease had just been terminated. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. Thank you, George. The pleasure, he said, a genuine smile finally breaking through, is all mine. I walked out of that office and into the bright sunlight, not as Eleanor the widow, or Eleanor the mother, or Eleanor the quiet homebody. I walked out as Eleanor Abernathy, the sole and absolute trustee of her own life. The game had been set. The pieces were in motion. All I had to do now was wait for the screaming to start. The first tremor hit on a Thursday afternoon, 2 days after my meeting with Mr. Harrison. I was in my garden, pruning the rose bushes Robert had planted for our 25th anniversary. My hands were covered in dirt, the sun was warm on my back, and for the first time in a long time, my mind was quiet. The phone, which I'd unblocked temporarily for the sole purpose of observing the fallout, started to buzz incessantly on the patio table. I ignored it. I knew what was happening. Somewhere in a high-end boutique, Chloe's card had just been declined. It was probably a humiliatingly public event. She'd have tried to laugh it off, blaming the bank, telling the cashier to run it again. The second decline would have sparked confusion. The third, a prickle of genuine fear. I could picture her perfectly, the forced smile tightening on her face, the flush creeping up her neck, the frantic, fumbling search for another card in her $1,000 wallet, only to find that it, too, was suddenly just a useless piece of plastic. The first text came through. Mom, something weird is going on with my card. Call me an hour later. The tone shifted. This one was from Julian. Eleanor, my mortgage payment was rejected. The bank just called. What the hell is going on? Did you forget to transfer the money? Eleanor. Not Mom. The pleasantries were the first things to go. I continued to prune my roses, snipping away the dead blooms with satisfying finality. The phone kept buzzing, a frantic, angry bee trapped in a jar. Voicemails started piling up. I listened to the first one from Chloe out of a sense of clinical curiosity. Her voice was high-pitched, a cocktail of indignation and rising panic. "Mom? I was so embarrassed. I was trying to buy my wedding shoes and my card was declined. All of them. I had to just leave them there. People were staring. You have to fix this. Right now." I deleted the voicemail. The next one, an hour later, was from Julian. His tone was more aggressive. "I've been trying to reach you all day. Chloe is freaking out. I can't get a hold of anyone at the Trust's financial office. They said they can only speak to the primary trustee. Call me back. This isn't funny, it wasn't meant to be." The real storm broke on Friday morning. It came in the form of a call from Chloe's wedding planner, a flustered woman named Penelope. I answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Abernathy. It's Penelope Vance." Chloe's planner, her voice was strained. "I just received a very distressing call from the manager at North Ridge Vineyard. He says the venue is no longer available for the 21st. He said it's been booked for a private event. There must be some mistake." "Chloe will be devastated." "There's no mistake, Penelope," I said calmly. "The venue is unavailable but all the other vendors are booked. The caterer, the band, the florist, the deposits are all paid. We can't just move the location a little over 2 weeks before the wedding. It's impossible." "That sounds like a very difficult situation," I said, my voice dripping with an empathy I did not feel. "I'm sure you and Chloe will figure something out." There was a stunned silence on the line. "But you're the one who paid the deposits. We were under the assumption that the trust would be handling the final payments." "Assumptions can be very dangerous," I said softly. "As for the deposits, please consider them a gift. A severance package, if you will. I won't be requiring them back. However, any outstanding or future balances are, I'm afraid, entirely Chloe's responsibility." I could hear her sharp intake of breath. The professional veneer was cracking. "Chloe doesn't have that kind of money. We are talking about over $150,000 in final payments." "Indeed," I said. "Well, I wish you the best of luck." I hung up the phone. I imagined the call Penelope would now have to make to Chloe. The dam of my daughter's denial was about to break, and a tsunami of financial reality was about to hit her. The rest of the day was a symphony of their unraveling. A joint email arrived, the subject line in all caps, "Urgent family matter." It was a long, rambling screed, shifting incoherently between confusion, accusation, and feigned concern. "We are worried you're not thinking clearly. This could have serious legal ramifications. You are ruining my wedding, my one special day. Dad would never have wanted this." That last line almost made me laugh. Dad was the architect of all of this. He had seen this day coming from a decade away. I typed a simple, one-sentence reply. "All financial and legal inquiries should be directed to Mr. George Harrison at Harrison, Creed and Associates." Then I reblocked their numbers and their email addresses. The silence that followed was blissful. I spent the weekend cleaning out the house. Not in a sad, mournful way, but in a cleansing, liberating way. I packed up the children's old rooms, boxing up the sports trophies and prom photos. These were relics of a family that no longer existed. I went through my own closets, getting rid of the drab, sensible clothes of Eleanor the widow and keeping only the things that brought me joy. I was excavating my own life, getting back to the foundation. On Monday morning, Mr. Harrison called. "They've been in touch," he said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. First Julian called, demanding answers. He threatened legal action. I calmly explained that as beneficiaries of a discretionary trust, they have no legal standing to demand anything. Their access to funds is, and always has been, entirely at the discretion of the sole trustee. "You and Chloe?" I asked. She called this morning. Crying. She begged me to intercede, to ask you what she had done wrong, and what did you say? I told her to ask herself that question, he said. I also informed her that several of her wedding vendors had already been in touch with my office, asking about payment. It seems the news of her financial situation is traveling fast. The panic was now metastasizing. Their carefully curated world was crumbling, and they were realizing, with dawning horror, that the ground beneath their feet was not solid ground at all. It was me. And I had decided to move. The final, desperate move came in the form of a car pulling into my driveway late on Monday afternoon. It was Julian's ostentatious SUV, a gas-guzzling monster I had made the down payment on. But it wasn't Julian who got out of the driver's seat. It was Chloe. Her face was pale and blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed. Her designer clothes looked rumpled, as if she'd been sleeping in them. She walked up to my front door, the one her father had built, and rang the bell. The confrontation was about to happen. And I was ready. I watched her approach through the window in the living room, a spectator in my own home. She looked small and lost, stripped of the glossy confidence that had been her armor for so long. The panic had hollowed her out. She pressed the doorbell again, a longer, more insistent ring this time. I took a deep, steadying breath, walked to the door, and opened it. I didn't open it all the way, just a few inches, leaving the security chain latched. It was a clear, unambiguous barrier. She stared at the brass chain, as if it were a physical blow. "Mom," she said, her voice a raw, pleading whisper. "Let me in. We need to talk." "There is nothing to talk about, Chloe," I said, my voice even and calm. It was startling, even to me, how devoid of emotion I felt. The years of hurt had been cauterized, leaving behind only a cool, hard scar. "What do you mean, there's nothing to talk about? You've destroyed my life. My wedding is gone. The vendors are threatening to sue me. Julian is going to default on his house. What are you doing?" The "you" was an accusation, a knife she was trying to plunge into me. But the blade just skidded off my armor. "I haven't done anything, Chloe," I replied. "I have simply stopped doing. I have stopped funding a lifestyle you are not entitled to. I have stopped paying for a wedding I was not invited to. These are the natural consequences of your own actions." Her face crumpled. The performative tears of a manipulator began to flow. "The live stream, that was just, we were just worried about you. The travel, the stress, we thought it would be better for you." It was so pathetic, so transparent, I almost felt a flicker of pity. Almost. "Let's be honest with each other, for the first time in a very long time," I said, my voice dropping lower, cutting through her rehearsed lines. "You weren't worried about me. You were embarrassed by me. You and your brother see me as a simple, provincial old woman who doesn't fit into your sophisticated world. An open wallet and a closed mouth, that's the mother you wanted. The moment I became an inconvenience, a logistical problem for your seating chart, I was discarded. The problem is, you forgot who signed the checks." She flinched, the truth of my words hitting her squarely. The tears faltered. "That's not true," she stammered, but with no conviction. "We love you, love?" I asked, and this time I let a sliver of the cold fury show. "You text your mother, the woman who gave you life, the woman who has funded every single one of your whims for the last 5 years, to tell her she's uninvited from your wedding. And you follow it up with a heart emoji. That's not love, Chloe. That is a transaction. And your credit has been declined." From inside the house, I could hear her fiancé, Marcus, who had apparently been waiting in the car, now striding up the walkway. He was a man who looked like he'd been assembled from a catalogue of expensive brands. He put a protective arm around Chloe. "Mrs. Abernathy," he began, his voice oozing the kind of condescending charm he probably used to close business deals. "I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. We want you at the wedding. Of course we do. We'll make it right. Just tell your lawyer to turn the accounts back on. The deposits are non-refundable. We stand to lose everything. She stands to lose everything, I corrected him, looking directly into his eyes. You, Marcus, stand to lose nothing, because you have brought nothing to the table. You are marrying a lifestyle, not a person. And that lifestyle has just been discontinued. Marcus's jaw tightened. The charming mask slipped, revealing the raw opportunism beneath. You can't do this, he said, his voice turning hard. Chloe is your daughter and she made her choice, I said. I looked back at Chloe, who was now staring at me with a dawning horror. It wasn't just about the money anymore. She was finally, truly seeing me. Not Mom. Not the bank. But Eleanor. A separate person, with her own thoughts, her own power, her own breaking point. I have one question for you, Chloe, I said, my voice quiet again. If you had known, truly known, about the extent of the trust, about my sole control, about the fact that I personally own the vineyard you planned to get married in, would you still have sent me that text? She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence was her answer. It was the most honest thing she had said to me in a decade. That's what I thought, I said. I looked at them both, a pair of grasping, hollow children, standing on the precipice of a life they would have to build for themselves. I wish you both the life you deserve. With that, I closed the door, sliding the bolt firmly into place. I didn't wait to hear them leave. I walked back into the living room, the afternoon sun streaming in, and I felt nothing but a vast, quiet, and profound peace. The confrontation wasn't the end of the war. It was the signing of the armistice, entirely on my terms. The house was finally, blessedly, quiet. My house. In the weeks that followed my final conversation with Chloe and Marcus, a new kind of silence settled over my life. It wasn't the lonely silence of an empty nest, it was the peaceful, expansive silence of a reclaimed territory. The frantic calls and emails had ceased, replaced by a wall of sullen resentment I could feel from miles away. Mr. Harrison kept me updated on the practical fallout. Julian, faced with foreclosure, had been forced to sell his oversized house in the suburbs and move his family into a small rental apartment. His wife, I was told, was not pleased. They were learning the hard way about the difference between income and assets. Chloe's fairy tale wedding had evaporated. Without a venue and without funds, her vendors had either cancelled or were pursuing her for the remaining balances. Her social media, once a relentless stream of curated perfection, went dark. I heard through a distant cousin that she and Marcus had postponed the wedding indefinitely, citing personal reasons. The empire of their entitlement, built on the foundation of my quiet labor, had crumbled to dust. I did not gloat. I did not seek out news of their struggles. To do so would be to remain tethered to them, and the entire point of my actions was to cut the cord. My focus was now entirely on my own life, a life I was designing for the first time, just for me. The first thing I did was sell the house. The house Robert built, the heart of our family. It was a beautiful house, full of memories, but it was also a museum to a life that was over. The echoes of my children's laughter had been replaced by the ghost of their greed. It was time to let it go. I sold it to a young family, with bright-eyed children, who ran through the yard with a joy I hadn't seen in years. I knew they would honor the heart Robert had built into it. With the proceeds, and with a fraction of the capital from the trust, I bought a small, elegant condominium overlooking the ocean, 3 states away. It was a place I had always dreamed of, a place Robert and I had talked about retiring to one day. It was sleek and modern, with walls of glass that let the light pour in. There were no dusty trophies, no childhood bedrooms to keep clean. There was just space. My space. I started to travel. Not to the trendy, ostentatious resorts my children favored, but to the places that called to my soul. I spent 2 weeks in a small village in Italy, learning to make pasta from a woman who was 80 years old and still kneaded dough every morning. I walked the misty highlands of Scotland. I sat in a cafe in Paris for an entire afternoon, reading a book and watching the world go by, without a single thought for anyone else's schedule or needs. I was a person, not a function. A traveler, not a tourist. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who had known me before I was Chloe and Julian's mother. I had lunch with my maid of honor from my wedding, and we laughed until we cried, remembering the foolish, hopeful girls we had been. I found that my world, which I had allowed to shrink to the size of my children's needs, was actually vast and filled with people who saw me, Eleanor, and liked me for who I was. And then there was the vineyard. North Ridge. My beautiful, profitable jewel. I didn't sell it. I leaned into it. I moved into the small manager's cottage on the property for the summer, a temporary home before my condo was ready. I spent my days walking the rows of vines, talking with the agronomists, learning the intricate dance of sun and soil and rain. I discovered I had a passion for it, the same way I had a passion for numbers and structures. It was another form of building something that lasts. One afternoon, I was sitting on the veranda of the main tasting room, the same veranda where Chloe had planned to have her cocktail reception, when Mr. Harrison called. He had a final update. Julian had found a new job, a humbler one, and was slowly getting back on his feet. Chloe had broken off her engagement to Marcus. Apparently, the lifestyle she was no longer able to provide was a deal-breaker for him. She had taken a job as an event assistant at a downtown hotel. She was, in a bitter twist of cosmic irony, now the person who had to deal with demanding brides. "She left a message for you," Mr. Harrison said, his voice neutral. "She asked me to tell you that she understands now." I didn't know if I believed it. Understanding is a long road, and she had only just taken the first step. But it didn't matter. Her understanding, or lack thereof, was no longer my concern. My liberation was not contingent on her apology. My peace was not dependent on her remorse. It was mine, earned and paid for. I looked out over the rolling hills of my vineyard, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple. A glass of my own Sauvignon Blanc sat on the table before me. It was crisp and clean, with a slightly sharp finish. It was perfect. I was free. The sun is just beginning to set now, casting long shadows across the white sand. From my balcony, I can see the waves rolling in, a constant, soothing rhythm. The air tastes of salt and freedom. It's been a year since I sent that final, simple email to my children. A year since I took the controls of my own life back. I sometimes wonder if they think of me. I'm sure they do, probably with a mixture of resentment, anger, and perhaps, on a good day, a sliver of grudging respect. They have been forced to grow up, decades late, and I know the process has been painful. Julian sends a generic Christmas card now, with a stiff, formal note. Chloe has never tried to contact me again. I've accepted that the warm, loving family I thought I had was, in many ways, an illusion I helped to create. I was the architect of my own gilded cage, polishing the bars and calling it a home. The truth is, Robert's greatest gift to me was not his fortune, it was his foresight. He built a fortress around me, and it took me years to realize I wasn't the prisoner. I was the queen. He gave me the tools, the structure, the absolute authority. It was up to me to find the courage to wield it. My new life is quiet, but it is not small. It is filled with new friends who know me as Eleanor, the woman who tells interesting stories about her travels, who has a surprising knowledge of viticulture, and who can recommend a good book. It is filled with purpose. I've taken my experience managing the trust and now volunteer with a non-profit that helps women gain financial literacy. I teach them how to read a balance sheet, how to build a budget, how to invest in their own futures. I am teaching them how to build their own fortresses, not of money, but of independence. I am turning my pain into power, not just for myself, but for others. Every now and then, I will see a young woman who reminds me of Chloe, polished, beautiful, with that same glimmer of entitlement in her eyes, and I feel a pang, not of anger, but of a distant, clinical sadness. I see how they treat their mothers, with that casual condescension, that easy assumption of availability. They see a utility, a service provider, a background character in their own grand narrative. They have no idea of the quiet strength, the hidden depths, the detailed ledgers being kept in the minds of the women they so carelessly dismiss. They don't know that every mother has a breaking point. My story is not just about money or revenge. It's about self-worth. It's about the moment you stop accepting the valuation others have placed on you and start setting your own price. My price, I have decided, is peace. It is freedom. It is the view of the ocean from a balcony that is mine and mine alone. I did not ruin my children's lives. I simply stopped letting them ruin mine. They were given every advantage, every opportunity to build lives of their own. Instead, they chose to become parasites on mine. I am not the villain of this story. I am the survivor. I am the woman who finally remembered that the person you must be most loyal to is the person you see in the mirror. She is the one who has been there through it all, who has sacrificed, who has endured, and who deserves, finally, to be happy. So, that's my story. The story of how a text message meant to push me away actually propelled me into the life I was always meant to live. It was a painful, brutal, and ultimately liberating journey. It taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and even for your children, is to let them fall. You have to let them experience the consequences of their own choices, because shielding them from reality is not an act of love, it is an act of crippling them. I know my story might be controversial to some. There will be those who say a mother's love should be unconditional, that I should have forgiven them, that family is everything. And to them, I would say that family is indeed everything, but a family is a system of mutual respect, love, and support. It is not a one-way street of sacrifice and entitlement. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional funding. It does not mean you have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I chose to save myself, and in doing so, I gave my children the only gift I had left to give them, the chance to save themselves. Whether they take it or not is their story, not mine. My story is this beautiful sunset, this quiet condo, this profound sense of peace. My chapter with them is closed. My book, however, is just beginning. And I have to say, it's the most exciting thing I've ever read. So now I want to ask you, the person listening to my story, what would you have done? Would you have continued to fund a life you were excluded from? Would you have quietly accepted your seat in front of the live stream? Or would you have picked up the sword that was yours all along and carved out a new path for yourself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories, your perspectives, they matter. They create a community of people who understand that it's never too late to reclaim your own narrative. And if you've ever felt underestimated or overlooked, if you've ever had to fight for your own happy ending, please subscribe to the channel and share this story. Because we all deserve to have our voices heard, especially those of us who have been quiet for far too long. Thank you for listening. Now, if you'll excuse me, the tide is coming in, and I don't want to miss a single second of it.